I feel like this is the stanza break, and we should just take a minute to reflect how wonderful it is to be here, to have a bookstore like Malvern in our city that is such a hearth to writers. I'm so excited to hear Emily's words and get to welcome you in our city reading for your book for the first time. That was amazing. So next up is Ryan Sharp. So Ryan holds an MFA in writing from Pacific University and is currently pursuing his PhD in poetry and poetics at the University of Texas. His poetry and reviews have appeared or are forthcoming in several journals, including Berkeley Poetry Review, Callaloo, DIALOGIST, the Ilanot Review, and PANK. He lives here, where he serves as the editor for Borderlands Texas Poetry Review and as the writer's studio coordinator at Huston-Tillotson. And I think that many people in this community deeply value what Ryan has done in terms of curating Borderlands and really making it a conversation. It feels like a journal that's incredibly alive. And I think part of the reason that it feels so alive is that Ryan is an amazing poet. And if you've read, I've only read a few of his poems, but he just has such a generous, nuanced, interesting mind, and I'm super excited to hear more of his work. So please welcome Ryan Sharp.
Wow. Let's hope I live up to the introduction. Yeah, thank you, Emily and Sasha, for bringing me here in Malvern. It's always a good time to kind of share poems. And also, like Sasha mentioned, I've been doing more scholarly work at UT, and so I haven't had as much time to write poetry, and so this has been a really great excuse for me to kind of write some new poems. And because it's been hard to carve out time for that between the teaching and the fathering and all the different things. It also was interesting because listening to your poetry, Emily, like there's a lot of interesting like topical like intersections that I didn't realize were good. Like for instance, I started shuffling my poems, and when you were reading, I was like, oh, okay, so fables. I'm into fables too, and so I'm going to start with some stuff that kind of plays with ideas of fantasy, like fables and fantasies and kind of archetypal stories. But I also wanted to say real quick that to kind of preface these is that yesterday was my 10-year anniversary with my wife, and so. Yeah, I want to start like that, so I had a little bit of like social capital with everybody in case. But it made me reflect on it. Made me feel like a grown-up. 10 years is a long time, and a lot of my poetry is kind of me fleshing out kind of my family history and my childhood, and some of it being from a biracial background and from difficult family situations and so on and so forth. So this first poem is called, it kind of mirrors or appropriates a fable that's kind of popular in a lot of Eastern religions about the blind man and the elephant. If you don't know the fable, most iterations of it have a series of men who can't see that are going and trying to describe an elephant. They all touch a different part of an elephant, and so they all give drastically different descriptions. And this poem kind of started this first series because my brothers and I went golfing for my younger brother's bachelor party, and we all grew up with these shared experiences, but then as grown-ups we started talking about them and realized that we all had drastically different perspectives of the same shared experience. And so this kind of birthed this whole series, which I'll read about 5 of them from, that I just called The Three Brothers. And then I like to work with constraints, and so they all have like a similar structure. Like the first brother says something, the second brother says something, then the third brother feels something, and then there's something said about the sister. So this first one's called Rubbing the Elephants. 3 brothers are blind men groping an elephant. The first says, the elephant's skin is our father's ashy elbows. The second says, the elephant has ingenue eyelashes like our mother. While the third feels that the elephant's substance lies in its heavy metal. The first then asks, where is our sister? No one knows. In the hours they spend rubbing the truths from the elephant, they never allow their hands to touch. The enormous hole. 3 brothers sit in a room with an enormous hole in the wall. It is very cold. The first brother says, we should do something about the hole in the wall. It is very cold. Weeks later, the second says, we should do something about the enormous hole in the wall. It has frozen our mother. Months pass. The third feels the hole in the wall is what chased away their father. The first asks, can anyone see our sister through the hole in the wall? After spending the better part of their 20s observing the hole in the wall, the brothers decide to give it a name. Folding paper. 3 brothers are at the kitchen table, folding memories like paper into birds. The first says, I will fold the memory of us up too late, watching Arsenio flash his immense teeth into a white loon hovering over green water. The second says, I will make the image of our father, handgun perched on the passenger seat, into a sparrow hemmed into a bluebird box. The third feels the story of their mother explaining AA over dollar Sundays is too brittle to be bent into a hummingbird. The first asks, when will our sister be back with more? The brothers know nothing of origami, but everything about erasure, how the moments hang prettier from the ceiling when given feathers, wings. This one's one I just wrote yesterday. There's a couple lines that I took from Waiting for Godot. One of them is Nothing to be Done, which is Estragon's first line in the play. He says nothing to be done, was like struggling with his boots. Another one is kind of inspired from another line that Estragon says when he says the waiting is a type of prayer, supplication. And then the third one is Pazzo's last line, in which he says, the light gleaming, the light gleaming, if only for an instant. So you'll kind of see those as they appear in the poem. 3 brothers are waiting shoeless and beaten at the bare tree where they seem to recall they should be waiting. The first says, the shepherd boy told me our father will be here tomorrow again. The second says, nothing to be done. We must think of our mother like time, a circle. The third feels the waiting in itself is a type of prayer, a vague supplication. The first asks, where has our sister's voice gone? The brothers cannot remember how long they have waited, but they know it is an important game, the waiting and the hoping, the light gleaming, if only for an instant. I don't have any funny poems. And I wish I could. They're all one note, but they're all pretty much. Essentially, these 3 brother poems are kind of somewhat the same thing, funneled through a different narrative, and I guess in a way, in the spirit of kind of trying to approach the same truth from different angles. This last one, you'll probably recognize the story of the 3 bears in it, and so this one's called Bearskins. 3 brothers have draped pelts over their shoulders, pretending to be bears. The first says, maybe father will eat too much hot porridge here and stay. The second says, maybe mother will rest her yellow head here and stay. The third feels they will return to an empty house again and stay. The first then asks, will our sisters see our new bear suits and stay? There are all sorts of violence, the empty house, the broken chair given over to fire, the brothers' fear, and what that bore upon the former bears. This next is a little bit stranger series called My Imaginary Old Man, which I think you probably get the thinly veiled kind of things going on in there. But the thing that goes kind of with the constraints in these poems is that it doesn't have any punctuation that breaks up the sentences, and so a lot of times the clauses read into each other and it has somewhat of a prismatic effect. And so you'll kind of pick up on that. For instance, the first line reads in this particular poem, in dreams there is still the dream where he was, different everything was the tree bent. And so there's a couple different clauses going on in there. In the dreams there is still the dream. Then there's the dream where he was different and everything was different, and so on. You'll kind of see. In dreams there is still the dream where he was different. everything was. The tree bent its shadow toward the road, not the river. The lilies pushing up the hill into a mountain hold their tongues. The blind flowers, each lying upon each needing each. No rough hand filching what few white petals. How the bridge did not shake here. The temple is made out of breath, not mud and bricks. He remembers there being a child somewhere off in his periphery, but that is as far as it goes. The dreaming that is still the waking and the living. My imaginary, I should say, they don't have any titles. It's just all kind of bleeds together. So usually when I send them out, I just kind of, the first line is the title. So my imaginary old man is here. My imaginary old man is here, despite what they say here. He knows he is here. Even the unreal get their own song. The unreal still feel at least their own song, have worn like an old tree in several directions at once, have drawn into the night as the tree wears. He draws into the night as the song dies behind the tree. He says, if I stay here long, trouble will find me. He says, if I stay, I may never leave. I want to hold time still like stone. I want to hold it down and breathe its feathers in. My brother, my imaginary old man himself, a bird like time, his arms held out flying. I follow him, a bird, our mouths knives, our hands cupping air, wings casting long shadows. They seem to mean something, but they do not. They're only our bird shadows, would seem enough or not enough. If I can go now, he says, there might still be time to forget. Soon it will be time to leave, but to where? He is always leaving somewhere, always. He made me how I am, he made me who. If one counts time, we are three birds in one. I guess this one I might just call broken. I keep on getting text messages. Somebody out there just really likes the poems. Cool. Okay. Let's do that. Okay. The red oak broken, the yellow lawn broke, the old red brick house broken, juiced of all its copper, the red door broken, his room breaks off the end of the hallway. He broke, his armchair broke, his hands broken shovels, his shoulders break downward, his voice breaks, a broken pipeline, his 2 ears broken, torches, his eyes crushed white calla lilies, broken. He says history is something else. His words, torn lemons, his broken burden, the scratched records, his children, broken songbirds, his wives, string and paper cups. Everyone knows what kind of man he is. Everyone knows what kind of man he is. My imaginary old man holds no pretense. He is just as imaginary as the rest of us. He puts his pants on, one abstract at a time. He too carries his own suitcase full of blackening moths and broken watches, white tube socks to feed the moths. He cares too much for the almost butterflies. Like most, he sees himself in winged things, small odes to wind and revival, to be reborn, bright and beautiful like a butterfly. That is one of his dreams. Like most, though he is more like the moths, how they pepper to shadow the pollutants. Before the fall, he had all the makings of an activist. His wide owl eyes, his silver bullet tongue, all his untamed salt and pepper facial hair he had spun years of cotton into. Then he could have marched a whole kingdom of moths across the riverbed, the way he would have held his long fingers out in front of the crowd like constellations. He has always been skilled at the performance of dying, but not staying dead. After his first death, all that was left behind was dust, light, matter, a suit worn thin in the knees and pockets, deep in depression, deep as a dirt grave. He never named anything he could not bury. He is practiced in digging holes, at deep turning the feel of wet soil, sifting through his deep space hands. We know him for his vastness, goes on for good, even in his most illusory moments, the soot-stained moths that could be trees like his whole hands realized in the Milky Way mud, feeling for root or stone to turn over, stars that could go on forever like him. I should also say that the constraint with these is they're kind of a syllabic practice too, so all the lines are 10 syllables, which you may or may not be able to hear as I'm reading them, but that kind of adds to kind of how I'm kind of forced to play with the language in some of the places. That imaginary old man could sing hymns all day with his eyes closed, his upturned palms testing the stale canary yellow air for the perfume of broken songbirds, blue notes trembling out of tired throats. They can live again in his riverbed hands, his fingers slow curling Lazarus plants, killing themselves a little to live. I think this is maybe my last one right here. Yeah. Is Flint to stone, I should call this. Is Flint to stone to, let me start that again. Is flint to stone tool to twig feathering fire, is full of 5 different types of want and want, is everywhere now, but only sometimes, is skin past flesh to bone, and time is flecks of bright gold stitched into dried mud flat, is seeds wishing, is pleas in the dark, is not dream, and dream is not what was said, but also every word of it, is butterfly old light, and cave is often listening, meaning silent, is trying to regain control of his own image, is both water warping and drinking straw, is exit wounds and theme park churro, is steeped in part truth and part pure cane sugar, is complicated, is space between wing and church, is split seams and bridges falling down, is odd flight but intentional, is white dress shirt and spilt wine, is home but far from it, is new song but old words I know. Thank you.